and gentlemen, it is the Demons from Outer Space, episode 120. Joining me, Dylan McCandless, Super DM 64.
Hi, everybody.
Dylan, you are going to be partially giving me some kind of version of some sort of education about a franchise tonight. What part of what franchise are we discussing this evening?
Yes, so when last we left the X-Men, they were in a pretty rough shape.
The G-Men, as they're sometimes known.
They were in pretty rough shape. We had The Last Stand, which was not good, but maybe not as bad as people give it credit for, you know. And then we had X-Men Origins Wolverine, which, aside from a wonderful performance by Liev Schreiber, is a dumpster fire. So
That's putting it lightly.
So the franchise, as far as I could tell at the time, was dead. And I was really bummed about that because I had remembered around the time that X-Men Origins Wolverine had been announced. They had also announced plans to maybe do a Magneto origin movie, and that had sounded really cool. And we kind of got that because a few years later in 2010, 11? One of those years.
11, yeah.
11, we received X-Men First Class, the movie that turned this franchise right the fuck back around.
X-Men Class Primero.
Indeed, and this was your first time watching the movie, correct, Bill?
It was, yeah. I've never seen this movie at all. I've never even seen like very many clips of it. I've heard people talk about it at length, so I knew all the major stuff that happens. But even when I listened to that was a long time ago, and I didn't remember any of it when I watched it this time because everything that was supposed to surprise a first-time viewer, I was either surprised by or I forgot until it happened. So we'll talk about some of those things. But yeah, no, I found myself sort of in a rare position of enjoying a superhero movie that I didn't have very much expectation for or of about like what exactly it was about. Maybe just in terms of like I've heard it was very good, but I didn't have that expectation of like, oh, this is going to be like totally flawless. I have nothing but like the utmost expectations. I was like, I know what these X-Men movies are capable of. I'm prepared. And I was pleasantly surprised is not the word. I was floored by what I viewed. This gets credited by a lot of people as like the best X-Men movie. You yourself said it was your favorite, correct?
I have to reevaluate that now, actually. It's been a while.
Yeah, but does Logan even like... Are you counting Logan in that? Because I don't think Logan counts. I'm not counting Logan.
Yeah. If you don't count Logan, yeah, this might be my favorite. It's definitely right up there with the other two ones that are considered the best, that being X2 and Days of Future Past.
I have seen those two.
Yes. Yeah, this is a fantastic movie.
Yeah, I do.
How did you feel comparing it to the ones that you've seen?
Yeah.
Or at least the ones that we've talked about up until this point.
Right, well, I saw Days of Future Past when it came out. That was my first exposure to this era of X-Men, this sort of reboot prequel stuff, and this cast.
Yeah, there are only two more that we're going to review at some point that you haven't seen yet, right? The Wolverine and Apocalypse.
Right, and I have seen a lot of the Wolverine now because we put it on at work one day. I just didn't hear a lot of it, but I saw it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I haven't seen like any of Apocalypse, which but all like the trailers I've seen from it and all the things I've heard about it make me very disappointed because of how good this is. And to be honest, I kind of wish. Yeah, and I wish Days of Future Past was better. A little bit. I think the Days of Future... Because Days of Future Past never wowed me. I was always like, it was fine. And this knocks that out of the water. Because Days of Future Past is too... It's too convoluted, quite simply. And I think not only is it too convoluted, but things don't add up, and it starts to be a problem because the emotional weight of everything starts to become wrapped up in what doesn't make sense, and that's problematic when you're dealing with time travel. We'll get there though. That'll be the next one. Oh no, the next one will be the Wolverine. So
yeah. That'll be the 2 from now.
Right. So we'll get there. But
It goes the Wolverine, that Deadpool, Apocalypse, and then Logan, and then we'll be all caught up.
Yep. The beauty of a movie like this, though, is that it doesn't fucking matter what doesn't make sense. And that's a wonderful thing in a superhero movie, and the best X-Men movies do that, because they all, and this one is included, have these very sort of clunky elements, and a variant sort of don't line up perfectly, but they have these clunkier elements that the MCU and even the DCEU movies have managed to get away from, that are like these very early 2000s kind of bizarre, like special effects and acting moments that just, and even just scripting moments that just don't line up or are very cheesy. And it doesn't, and it's even more distracting in modern filmmaking. And it's also distracting because of all the stuff in the movie that gets away from that and is so much better than those roots. So at the very least, this is a million times better than the first X-Men movie, and X3, of course. X2, they're probably neck and neck, but this is paced better, without a doubt. I don't know if it has a better plot, because part of the problem with this is that
it's certainly a lot more fun than X2.
Yeah, well, it's fun. It's more fun than any of them, and I think that's probably the thing that makes it stand out the most. And I mean, the different director helps a lot as well. However, another issue, and this just comes back to the clunkier side of the early 2000s roots of this whole franchise that we're still feeling the repercussions of, and we'll feel more of that in the next two because it's directed by Brian. They're directed by Bryan Singer. This one is not, but it still kind of feels like it is. They actually wanted Brian to do it originally. He helped develop. He helped develop the story. He's a producer. It's still his production company. He had something else going on at the time, and he couldn't do it for whatever reason. And then funny story, Slayer, which bombed bad. And then funny story, they actually weren't even considering Matthew Vaughn at that point because, and I never knew this, he was originally attached to X3 and left early on in production, and that's when Brett Ratner took over. And so they weren't even really considering him, but he had always wanted to do an X-Men movie. And but then they saw Kick-Ass, and they were like, we got to get this guy. Mm-hmm. Which I still haven't seen either. No, I haven't seen Kick-Ass. I should really watch that and the Kingsman movies. Kingsman I'm way more interested in. I should really watch both of those things, considering how much I love this movie. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but however, I do think that, and I think that this is a good thing partially. It still kind of feels like a Bryan Singer X-Men movie. In style, and not so much in style, in like tone and characterization, and definitely story-wise. Well, you kind of touched on this before. These were the pre-MCU days when you didn't plan your superhero universe out ahead of time. You just sort of made it up as you went along. Right. So the timeline of the X-Men universe, of the X-Men film universe, makes no fucking sense. And to be fair, the timeline in the comic books is fucked up as well. But I mean, that's comics, so you kind of expect that. The movie timeline is all fucked up. And this doesn't help with that. I mean, for one thing, in this movie, Beast creates Cerebro, whereas it was stated in X2 that was Professor X. And that is a major plot point in X2, because Magneto helps reverse it to kill all the mutants. Right. But this movie is so much fun and so well put together and everything that it doesn't matter. That Cerebro scene also is very brief. It's a montage. And it has one of the best scenes in the movie with the best cameo. Should we talk about that now, or should we save that for later? I mean, it's not a huge deal. I mean, I'm sure everybody knows. You see Wolverine in that one scene, and Eggman shows up for very briefly and tells them to go fuck themselves. It's great. The greatest scene in the movie. It's hysterical. I laughed out loud 3 separate times rewinding it. To see it again and again. It is amazing. I've seen it before, but I've never seen it in context. And in context, it's so much better because nobody else in the movie is remotely like that. And they just wander up to him, and they're trying to be, because this is also something I really liked about it. It's an X-Men movie where there isn't that instant bigotry against mutants because they're not an established thing yet, which is the first time we've seen that.
The Earth is just now learning about these mutants en masse and I really like the explanation in this for why mutants are all of a sudden appearing in greater numbers. They connect it to the atomic age thing.
Which is interesting. I don't know if that's a thing in the X-Men universe, but
it may be. It's hard to keep track because there's been so much.
Well, in Ultimate Marvel, it makes sense with that. Although it's more World War II, but it still lines up timeline wise. But the radiation affecting them is more of an idea here, more directly than anywhere else I've ever seen, which I thought was interesting.
That's certainly Kevin Bacon's whole hypothesis. And
he sits in a reactor for 10 minutes and turns into and it looks like that bit from Guardians 2 where they go through too many jumps.
Kind of, but it makes a lot of sense because that explains why by the time you get around to X1 and it's the year 2000, suddenly mutants are all over the fucking place, and it's like this big cultural problem.
Right. Well, I
like that a lot.
My point though was that we get this sense of wonder about it that we don't get to experience later because there's this instant like stigma attached to it. And it's part of the reason why the X-Men movies are so interesting as superhero films is that they exist in this world where the idea of looking up to these people is totally is not cool in society by and large. You know, it depends on your time in the Marvel universe or which version, but the X-Men are usually deemed as like terrorists or criminals or whatever in the public eye, and this version probably more so than any other, where they're just these weird leather-clad psychos who show up occasionally and clean up their own mess. So this one actually paints them in probably the most superheroic light because what they do at the end, you know, stops. I mean, A, a real thing that happened, and B, like this huge global disaster that's about to happen.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
One
not only are they the most heroic, but they take the most shit for it at the end.
Yeah, well, that's really the ending is so good. Well, one other thing though about the problem wise, I think this one isn't like one reason why X2 probably is better is because the villain or villains in that movie are just more developed. Because Shaw in this, while he's great. And Kevin Bacon's performance is great. And his relationship with Magneto is great. We know zero about him. Like, we know nothing about who the fuck he is or why he is the way he is. We know his philosophy. His philosophy is, control. I'm going to be in control. We're going to live like kings. Or I'm going to live like a king. You'll all be fine around me.
Well, basically, his philosophy is the same philosophy that Magneto develops.
Well, it's a sort of like, it's what Magneto will eventually become. Like even further down the line than we see him in like the first or second movie, where he's just this power mad despot.
He's essentially a proto Magneto,
right?
And I love the helmet in this movie because it's the most comic book Magneto that the helmet is.
The most comic book Magneto costume at the end too.
Yes, with the fucking horns on the helmet. Why they didn't
bring the top too? It's not only is it the most comic book accurate, it's so comic book accurate that if you're somebody like me who like is more familiar with like the more, you know, like, oh, this is the 90s era like Marvel Universe. I saw that and I was like, what the fuck? And then I looked up like early X-Men and like that's what it looked like. It was the dark purple and the dark red and the horns.
Yeah.
He was a very different character early on, and I like how they mix the more because he was more of a straight up independent antagonist in the beginning of the X-Men run. He didn't have the Brotherhood of Mutants or anything.
Yeah, no, they introduced that a little later on.
And we only get the seeds of that. In this, he is a one-man wrecking machine. I know we're kind of bouncing all over the place, but we don't have a set list, so we're just going to do that because it'll keep us going. But he's like a one-man wrecking machine in this, and I thought that was great. Especially given where he starts out, and this relates back to Shaw and the stuff that really works about him. And again, I want to know if you... to go back to my earlier issue, do you agree that we don't know anything about him, and that makes it potentially weaker than X2, despite being certainly more fun and better paced?
I mean, We don't know a ton about Brian Cox in X2 either, except that we find out that
We don't need to because he's so interesting and what he does is so. Well, yeah, but we know a lot about his son though. I disagree. We know that his son killed his wife.
Right.
That's a massive piece of character development. That even though I'm not saying like we spend an hour fucking developing his backstory. I don't need that. Couple lines telling me about him. Like that's it. That's all I'm asking for. We know his plan. I'm talking about Shaw now. We know Shaw's plan.
So we also don't know how old he is because it's established in this film that the reason he looks the same pretty much as he did in Germany in World War II, sans the mustache, is because his energy absorption abilities give him an extended lifespan.
Well, he's probably not even German. I mean,
probably. I mean,
he has. It seems his default is an American accent when we see him in the present day, or by present day I mean the early 1960s. What year is it specifically? 62. It's got to be 62 because Kennedy's president.
Yeah, I mean, whatever year the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. And I'm not entirely sure what his background and deal was in the comics either. I mean, I've read some stuff with the Hellfire Club. A lot of the Dark Phoenix stuff starts out with Hellfire Club. So I've seen them.
Is
before,
Shaw even a villain from the comics? I've never heard of him before in the comic, in the Marvel context, in the Marvel universe.
The leader of the Hellfire Club, which is this
okay
shadowy organization. I mean, they were the bad guys in the movie, fucking Hellfire Club.
Right. Well, I know them. And the Hellfire Club I've heard of in other X-Men stuff before, but
yeah,
and I know that they're a gang of bad mutants who do bad stuff. I don't know what exactly their deal is. I didn't know that they were like world conquering terrorists like they are in this. That was a new one on me, and that was an element of surprise. Again, I didn't really know the extent of the plan in this, and I was very captivated by that. This is definitely one of the better villain plots in an X-Men movie, even if the villain himself is one of the more underdeveloped, sadly. And again, it's only problematic because in the X-Men movies, like the villains are always like they're part of the charm. They're like the best part, like their comparisons to Professor X and some of the individual X-Men and what they try to do to them or try to get them to do for them is always so interesting.
Not always. I mean, whenever Ian McKellen Magneto is the villain, that's always the best part of the movie.
But Stryker is awesome.
Stryker.
The idea of the Phoenix is great. They fucked it up royally. But
again, Liev Schreiber kind of
Liev Schreiber's great.
The only great thing in that, God, I wish they'd
Stryker
bring him back.
in X-Men Origins performance-wise is good. His plan just is nonsense.
Yeah. Did you notice the little reference in this?
Yes, I thought that was great. I loved his dad because his dad was like exactly what you imagine from Stryker's dad, like exactly the same, but so much worse because he's a '60s old white man. So he's just he's 10 times worse of a bigot, Yeah,
I'm glad that it worked out so well with him in this movie because they kind of ruined Stryker a little bit in the next ones. But
they don't ruin him so much as just like they don't know what to do with him.
Not so much in Days of Future Past, but Apocalypse kind of the final nail in the coffin. We'll get there.
Okay, yeah, I haven't seen that yet, so I don't know what they do with him there.
Young Stryker. Not a fan of young Stryker. Even Origins Wolverine Stryker is better.
Yeah,
but anyway,
he performance-wise, he's good. Performance-wise, in Days of Future Past, I wasn't even sold on that dude.
But okay, so since we're kind of touching on this a little bit, things I liked about this as a person who is familiar with the comics and enjoys the X-Men franchise. I loved that we got to see certain characters. Like I never thought we would get Banshee in a movie previous to this. I never thought we'd get to see Azazel. And at the end of this movie, Azazel runs off with Mystique, and there's nothing in the movie to suggest to you that they're going to fuck at some point. But if you know the comics, you know that Azazel is Nightcrawler.
He's obviously Nightcrawler's dad. And isn't the black dude from Origins Wolverine also supposed to be Azazel?
The black dude? No, that's a different character.
They have the same powers though, teleportation.
There are a lot of teleporters.
And he in the X-Men Origins Wolverine game was supposed to be Nightcrawler's dad. That was set up in that.
Well, they fucked that way up because they probably weren't expecting Azazel to ever pop up in the movies, and they were just like, fuck it, we'll make him instead. But no.
What was that character's name?
I don't remember.
Fuck. You're a terrible X-Men fan. No,
Will.i.am, I always like to call him. You know how many years it took me to realize that was just spelling out William? You fucking... Anyway.
As if I did that because my name also happens to be William. Let me ask you this. So, the X-Men First Class is also... That's a comic as well. Is this in any way adapting a thing that happened in that? Or is this just the concept of X-Men, the early days?
I don't think so, because I'm pretty sure X-Men First Class actually went back to the comic. I'm pretty sure that actually goes back to, the actual First Class, which was Scott and Jean.
Well, I'm not saying it's the same characters, but just like plots.
Yeah. I don't think so, no. But they do get the, I love the yellow flight suits in this movie.
Yeah, those are awesome.
It's a great callback to the classic yellow X-Men costumes, while still being, in line with what was being done in the Bryan Singer films before, taking the X-Men costumes and pushing them into more of like a military-looking direction.
They're not goofy. They're just flamboyant, and they're very 60s appropriate. They look like something James Bond would have worn in, like, Thunderball.
Yeah. Later on, we would get an even more accurate first-class costume. Or a young mutant costume in Deadpool, but
yes, well, it's more streamlined, more modern. It's more of a superhero suit, which is what I like about that. I want to see more of those. I want to see just more comic book X-Men stuff. But apparently, that you see that in Apocalypse, and I didn't see that, so we'll get there.
But then another thing that I really love about this movie is that it plays up an element that I've always really loved, and I love when an X-Men story is basically played as what's the word I'm looking for? Espionage with superpowers. Because this is basically a spy movie. Shaw is basically a Bond villain.
Yes, he is a Blofeld. He's an Emilio Largo. He's a Silva. He's more of a Blofeld, though, because he's basically trying to do the same thing. He's trying to get Russia and America to murder each other, so that way he can pick up the pieces afterwards. Although it's kind of more clever than Blofeld because he has a double entendre for doing it. He doesn't just want them to blow each other up. He also wants to incite a mutant supremacy in the nuclear holocaust that would follow, which is genius.
Yeah. And
in that sense, I think that doing that kind of plot, which has been done in several Bond films or variations on that idea, in an X-Men context makes it's more fitting here because you can do that. You can go to that furthest extent with atomic mutants and everything. Like if you do that in a Bond movie, it makes people go like, "Really? We're gonna go that far? Like we're gonna have invisible cars too?" I think that's just cool because it's kind of like what Stromberg's plan was in The Spy Who Loved Me as well, where he was trying to.
Yeah. Stromberg was always, water Blofeld.
Right. Well, he was originally supposed to be a member of Spectre, like a follow-up to Blofeld.
And then there was Space Blofeld, but we don't like to talk
Drax.
about that.
Well, Drax is not a bad villain. He's just in a bad movie.
Well, he's also just a carbon copy of Stromberg. Maybe not personality-wise, but it's the same plan, only with space.
Yeah. Well,
same shit.
They just didn't trust that book, which is a good book. It's one of the earlier Bond novels as well. It sucks that we never actually got it adapted. I'm hoping that one of the newer ones will take that story and just not call it that, because you can never do another Bond movie and call it Moonraker because the stigma is too great.
People would hate it before it even got filmed.
Right.
Like I read Moonraker, rada.
Right. So you got to call it something else, but do that story where somebody's just trying to shoot a missile into space. Anyway. X-Men though.
Yeah, it's and surprisingly enough, Kevin Bacon makes a really good Bond villain. I never pictured him as a villain pre-2011, but my God,
you never saw really Hollow Man? This is like spot on to me. Like this makes a lot of sense.
I forgot Kevin Bacon was Hollow Man.
Yeah,
but no, I never saw Hollow Man.
Hollow Man is a movie from my childhood that fucked me up, but also captured my imagination. Because it was one of my first exposures to, like, this is a traditional monster movie with a thing I'm familiar with, the Invisible Man. But it's also, like, this hip, modern thing with tits in it and fucking, and Kevin Bacon is making jokes about Superman fucking the Invisible Man at the S.
Wonderful.
You know? And there's nothing in this that's like that, but no. I think that Kevin Bacon's performance is still great. I think his scenes with Magneto are the best. That coin scene early on is probably the best scene in the whole movie. It's so captivating.
Yeah, and the way they pay that off at the end.
Yeah, and that's what makes it the best scene because of how it comes back at the end, because you just completely forget about it. Like I did, like the fact that he has that coin still. They remind you of it early on, which is good. But I forgot because it's like 2 hours later, and then all of a sudden he's got this coin. And he's like, "I hope you're still in there because I'm going to count to 3." And I'm like, "Oh shit!" Yeah. Oh, it was so good. Oh, it's so good.
Michael Fassbender's Magneto has this wonderful talent for killing people with small objects that you would never expect him to kill people with. That comes back in.
Ian McKellen does that as well. He rips iron out of somebody's blood. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, but I mean, there's also a scene in Apocalypse where Michael Fassbender kills an entire group of people with a necklace. So
I have not seen that yet, so I will look forward to that. But in this, he also rips somebody's fillings out, which was a terrifying bit because I also have. I don't know what my fillings are made out of, so I don't know if he could do that to me, but I thought about that.
It's like that moment when I first saw X2 as a child, and I was like, oh god, I have iron in my blood.
We all do. That is
maybe not as much as that guy.
Technically, Magneto could rip the iron out of his own blood and use it as a weapon. Theoretically.
He could. I think that's the explanation for how he's able to fly, because I've never been 100% solid on that.
Yeah, I imagine so. But he's also got metal on him in his costume, so that's what makes that a thing. He can lift that stuff that makes him fly. It's like when he levitates Shaw in like a crucifix pose coming out of the sub at the end, which is an amazing bit.
Yeah,
and very like it's very Planet of the Apes to me for some reason. Like just very like a major stepping stone into civilization has been put down with a dark murder, you know?
This movie is for obvious reasons, the thing that has made Michael Fassbender my go-to pick for who should play the next James Bond.
Yeah, so all that stuff at the beginning with him running around killing Nazis is amazing.
I especially love the scene in the bar in Argentina.
That's the best scene.
That is fantastic. And it's the first time in the entire movie that he speaks any English. Like he spends like the first couple scenes speaking like several different foreign languages.
Right. Well, they're speaking German throughout the entire opening scene, and there's just that great moment that sticks out to me where, he fucking after his mother has been killed, Magneto finally starts displaying his powers, and instead of being afraid, Kevin Bacon just goes "Wunderbar," and I was just dying. And it's great, and there's a lot of that because the use of different languages gives it this scope and this intensity.
That's another thing that makes it feel like a spy movie, because it's not just the Kevin Bacon thing I was talking about before. This feels like a circa 1960 whatever spy movie. Like it makes perfect sense that this guy went on to do Kingsman. It's wonderful at that.
He clearly gets that world, gets that kind of story, and nails that tone here.
Yeah.
I like all that stuff better than all the superhero stuff, because that all feels way too modern. I think that's another problem with it, but it doesn't cripple it in any way. It's just I would have preferred a more retro approach.
I wish there was a way that we could have done the child Magneto stuff with Shaw at the beginning without having to show him bending the gate again, because we saw that at the beginning of X1.
Made me for a second think I was watching the original movie again. Like I was like, oh, is this? I clicked the wrong link, and then it went on longer. There was a window that went on, and I was like, oh, okay, that's new. So I guess not. I guess that's clever, because that was the idea of the... I imagine if you read the X-Men Origins Magneto script, it has exactly the same opening.
Well, I I wish there was a way to do that, but I realize that there's not. It's you kind of have to start there. It just kind of feels like a bit of a
They
Batman.
probably want people to think like, oh, we put the original movie on by accident. That's probably what they want people to think.
Yeah. I kind of get a similar feeling to that, though, as like watching the beginning of Batman v Superman and then Bruce Wayne's parents getting shot again and me going like, again with this.
I mean, that's at least better in the sense that that's a different version of something that we've never seen that version of his parents get shot. So whatever.
Well, technically, this is a different version too, but it's shot so similarly to the one from the first movie that honestly, I wasn't sure.
At this point, this is still technically a prequel, so well, mostly, but so yeah, it's the same. I agree with you, but again, I think they did it on purpose, and I think that's kind of clever. But
I just think there was no way of getting around it anyway, so I'm fine. I'm fine with it. You kind of have to start it there because you have to assume that not everybody in the audience has seen X1. So I get it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit of a bummer as somebody who's familiar with the films.
Well, stop watching so many movies.
trying to think. So much to say about this film, so little time. Never had the opportunity to discuss this on.
Why don't we talk about something we haven't talked at all yet? Professor X, fucking James McAvoy. He is also great.
He is. Not as great as Michael Fassbender, but right up there, man. Right. What I really love about...
I didn't think there was any distinction. I thought they were both just perfect for their distinct roles. The difference is, I mean, well, the thing is, like, they're both playing, like, very different characters from what we see of them when they're older, naturally.
Well, they feel like
Charles feels a lot more, like, a lot younger, though, and different than his older counterpart. Because obviously his older counterpart is burned by bullshit.
Yeah, they're doing their own things with the character, but at the same time, you can look at their performance and you can see them aging in those other people, and that's what's kind of pulled off perfectly in this film.
Because he plays older, and that's interesting. And Raven brings that up and is like, "Oh, you act like such an old man. You're gonna go bald." Or no,
and what I love,
that was later on. That wasn't Raven, but she says you act like such an old man.
Yeah. What I love about the three main mutants in this movie, Charles, Eric, and Mystique, is that they're all missing something that will make them the characters that they become by the time we get to X1. So Charles, he's got the intelligence, but he doesn't really have the wisdom yet that you get from a Patrick Stewart.
This is an arrogant Charles Xavier.
Exactly. And even on into Days of Future Past, we really don't get that wisdom until later on. Magneto is missing focus and the ability to really control his powers, because at the beginning of this movie, I mean, this is a character that we're used to seeing moving the Golden Gate Bridge, and his entire arc in this movie is learning how to lift a submarine.
I like that was another through line. Although the coin was also its own through line in that way, as we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so he doesn't have that degree. He doesn't have that degree of amazing control over his powers that made Ian McKellen, such a badass. And then Mystique is missing confidence. Her whole thing in this movie is that she's sort of ashamed of being a blue person.
Right. And she kind of blames Charles for that in the end, which is the mistake.
And I think that's a really smart way to handle her character, because especially in the films, she's known for being this, like, Mystique is known for being this, like, hyper sort of sexual threat. She seduces that guard in X2. She's running naked all the time.
So it's kind of a display of insecurity in that sense.
Yeah, she hasn't become that super ultra confident femme fatale yet that we get in X1. And I like that. I like getting to see these characters grow into who we want them to be,
Right. Well, it just makes them feel more three-dimensional, because these are characters who are background characters in those movies. I think that's why this is probably the best of the three of these, because it's just the most unique in terms of who it focuses on, and it feels the most valuable in telling those things about them. It's kind of like Logan. It's kind of like Logan in the sense that, like, we see, it's like, oh, I've always wanted to see this side of this character, and this character, and this character, and they're doing this. Like, it's kind of the perfect storm.
Yeah. And even though they get some of the details wrong about the backstory, again, having Hank build Cerebro, which I get because they sort of need to get that out of the way pretty quickly in this, and they wouldn't have had enough time to have those two characters in it. So I get why they changed that. But
Eric and Charles being friends for like a month.
Yeah.
That's another huge thing, is that they're only friends for like a month or maybe a few months.
Yeah, well, we don't know how long they're at. We don't know exactly how long they're at Xavier Mansion training before the actual missile crisis starts. Did they say a week?
Yeah, it's a week exactly.
Okay. So I missed that exposition there. But yeah. So it's not as long of a friendship as I would have liked. So they get a few details wrong here and there. But what's really
even
cool
as was originally stated, like originally Magneto was supposed to have taught at the school, and they were friends for decades.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it really conflicts with the scene at the beginning of X3, doesn't it? Where old-ass Magneto and Charles go to
It
recruit.
Completely contradicts that, yeah.
And at the time, you would just think, oh, well, they're just not even going to count X3 as canon anymore. But then you get to the Wolverine, and it's clearly canon. Again, the X-Men movie timeline is all fucked.
Right.
But anyway, but what I like about it is that all throughout the first three X-Men films, you have these scenes of Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen playing chess and talking about the good old days, and there's always a sense of, man, I wish I could see that when they were running around doing the things. And in this movie, we get to see them running around and doing the things. It's kind of delivering on this thing that you've wanted to see for 11 years.
And I'm not even mad at it for changing the element of it that they weren't friends for that long, or at least as relatively long as you would have expected, because the arc of it in this is so perfect. It's just like, well, this version of that had to play it that way, so who cares?
Yeah, well, one of the smartest things that the comics has done occasionally is drawn, because, you know, there's always a bit of a comparison between, or there's always a bit of allegory, especially in the 60s, between the mutant thing and the civil rights movement. In more recent years, it's become more of like a gay rights thing, because it's this whole thing about like getting your powers at puberty and et cetera, et cetera. But to start off with, in the 60s, it was a civil rights allegory.
Right.
And there's always this sort of parallel that basically Professor X is the MLK and Magneto is the Malcolm X. And you can totally see that in this movie.
That's probably best illustrated in this context and in this time period.
Yeah.
There's no direct scenes with the civil rights movement, which is nice, because if there were, oh god, that would be going too far.
That'd be too much to include.
Exactly. There's that one bit, and there's a good example of that as well in Days of Future Past, where they could have included some protests, but they didn't. They included some protests relating to like mutants and stuff, and I'm like, okay, that's a nice visual, you know, kind of simile without going to that, you know, very obvious place. But anyway, so point being, McAvoy is great as Professor X. His relationship with Raven is another thing that's kind of surprising, given that they really display zero semblance of any kind of prior relationship in the other movies, especially since she kidnapped him.
It's interesting that they make them have this sort of brother-sister relationship in this movie.
Almost father-daughter, but it's more like big brother, little sister kind of deal.
Right. And there's even like a little bit of a thing where, especially towards the beginning of the movie, you can tell that she wouldn't mind fucking him, but he's like, no, you're like my sister. Like he sees her as
she's very about him, and I think the fact that she gets burned on that because he's the only one he kind of sets himself up as the only person in the world she can trust. And when she makes that clear to him and decides to be like, well, listen, I have these feelings for you anyway. I mean, I think that you're the person I'd like to put these feelings towards. He's like, you're my like sister, no. And then she sees him out trying to fuck every girl in the world because he's like this arrogant mind reader, so he doesn't give a fuck about like trusting anybody. He doesn't need to trust anybody, you know? Nobody, because nobody would trust him given what he can do. And there is this implicit trust between he and her because she's like, oh, you said you'd never read my mind unless you asked me to. And he, by and large, he keeps up with that until the very end, it seems.
If you think about who he is and what he does and who he grows to become, Mystique is really his first student, in a way.
Right.
She's the first mutant that he reaches out to.
And his first failure.
Yeah, he brings her into his home and, tries to help her. And like you just said, he fails at it. And I think that's wonderful, because then that informs all of his efforts into the future when he becomes Patrick Stewart and eventually becomes senile and accidentally kills all of them in an alternate timeline that may or may not come to pass.
Right.
So that's all great.
For kids.
A family picture.
Well, that one wasn't, to be fair. I saw people take their kids to it, though.
It was so not a family picture.
No. It was a very touching family drama, though, interestingly.
It was.
That was the interesting thing about it.
Not a family picture,
no.
but a touching family drama.
Exactly. And that's what more could you ask for from a X-Men movie?
They're not mutually exclusive, it turns out.
So do you want to talk about some of the other X-Men?
Sure. I guess the other one besides the big three that we just discussed that has sort of the most going on would be Beast. And I really love Beast in this.
Yeah, he's great. He's another one that is a favorite of mine that doesn't really get much to do. I mean, he's like the best part of X3, so that's a plus. But yeah, outside of that, this is his big to do, and it's pretty good. It's really good. I wish he was in the. I wish he got to do more in the getup, because once he's in the monster mode, he just kind of flies a plane, and I'm like, why would you put him in the monster mode if he's just gonna fly a plane?
Well, he gets to do a little fighting when they're actually on the beach. So. Oh
yeah, okay, a little bit. That's true.
But I love the fact that he's a member of this first class, given what they did with him in X3 with Kelsey Grammer, where they made it apparent.
That was spot on. They really nailed that.
Where even though we hadn't seen him in the movies up until that point, he obviously had this huge history that had just, happened off camera. And we finally got a piece of that in this, which was always great.
Which is, again, one of the best things that X3 did was, like, set that up as a thing that was a possibility. Him being an early X-Men.
I loved the Jekyll and Hyde parallels that they did with him.
They laid it on a little thick, but I liked it. I liked the point of it. Jekyll and Hyde is not a story about multiple personalities. It's a story about a man struggling with his own animal urges. And I'm like, yeah, it's about controlling the dark side of ourselves and the temptation of ourselves. And I like what makes the Jekyll and Hyde parallel more apt for Hank is when he takes the serum that he designed using Raven's blood, and it fucks him over.
That's the best Jekyll and Hyde transformation sequence, or one of the best that I've ever seen. It's not even in a Jekyll and Hyde movie. What the fuck?
I've seen way better. I'm sorry, D.
I haven't seen a whole lot of film adaptations of Jekyll and Hyde.
I'm not even just talking about film adaptations of Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, I'm talking transformation scenes in general.
Oh, I very specifically said Jekyll and Hyde sequences, but all right.
Well, I mean, if we're counting, okay, but I didn't know you were like X-Men First Class, and then all of those. That's the pool. In that very specific pool.
I specifically said Jekyll and Hyde. Never mind. We're getting sidetracked.
It's a very specific pool to cast, though. But all right. Anyway,
the movie did it, not me. Fuck was I saying? And I like that they tied the serum that he injects himself in with Mystique, because that's not a thing in the comic. I don't think Mystique is in, because at first when he injects himself with the serum and transforms into the full Beast in the comics, he's not even blue. He starts out gray, and then later on he turned blue for whatever reason. He seems to get more and more mutated as the comics go on, because eventually he just started straight up like a cat, and he looks more like a cat in this movie than he did when he was Kelsey Grammer.
He looks more human at that point, yeah. I guess that's just like, he's older, though.
Yeah, it's just design choices, I guess. But anyway, I like that they tied that in with Mystique. It seems like anyone who's blue in this version of the universe, aside from Apocalypse, who wasn't supposed to be blue to begin with, but I'll forget about that for a second. It seems like everybody who's blue in this universe, they're just going to tie their origins to Mystique. Hank used her DNA in his serum. Nightcrawler's her son.
Do they state that very overtly in X-Men Apocalypse, that he's her son?
No, they kind of fuck it up. in that, unfortunately.
Oh, really?
They fuck up a lot of things in that.
So he's not her son?
Well, he could be, but if he is, she's staying very tight-lipped about it. I'll put it that way. She like rescues him from this like German like mutant cage fighting thing, and at no point is she like, "You're my lost child." The way she plays it, you think that she has no fucking idea who he is. So either they fucked the movie up when they were writing it and forgot that she's supposed to be his mother, or she's like super in that on the DL, like
which is possible.
Not even remotely wanting to tell him about it. Which yeah, is possible. I mean, it took a while to drag that out of the
she also might not know. To be fair, I guess she would know. She would remember giving birth to him.
If she fucked Azazel, which I assume happens in this period of time in between the two films where she's running around being one of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and so is Azazel. And I'm so sad that we never got to see him or Emma Frost or even the Tornado Guy. Why not?
I didn't really like the Tornado Guy because that effect wasn't very good.
Yeah, it wasn't. No. Yes. Did he have a single line?
No.
Yeah, you could have killed the Tornado Guy off screen. That would have been fine. But Azazel and Emma Frost were really cool, and I would have liked to see some more of them. Especially since Emma Frost is a bigger deal in the comics. Like, she goes on to be an X-Man for a while.
I didn't really get a great sense of her in this. She's a character who they've tried to put in some of the other ones. Like, she was briefly in Origins as a different thing.
Yeah. She's, well, in that, I think it's actually a separate character because they didn't do the whole telepathy thing in that movie. They just did the diamond form.
Right.
And Emma has always had both.
Right. Well, I mean, they do both in this, and it's for a more interesting reason.
Yeah. Yeah, she's just sort of an ice cold bitch in this movie, but she's really good at being an ice cold bitch, and I think it goes back to that whole feeling like a 60s Bond movie thing. She's very much the female henchman who seduces people and yes, If this was made in the 90s, she'd be strangling people with her legs,
If she, this is very golden. She is very femme fatale. I was just wondering if that was her deal in the comics as well, because it felt like what I'm familiar with of Emma Frost is like later Marvel, where she's like revered as this ultra level telepath. Obviously, that's not the character we're dealing with here. So I was just like wondering if they transformed her into that. Okay, like, and the fact that she's like that's pretty much all she gets to do. That's a little that kind of sucks. But the fact that they don't kill her is good because she can go on to do good things then. Yeah.
Potentially, yeah. And in the comics, she goes on to, be, I think, one of the highest ranking X-Men. Like, she's a pretty big deal. Mm-hmm. But yeah,
I love that she makes men think that she's like fucking them, and even though she's not, that's so clever.
That was a great scene. Also, did you realize that general is the bad guy from the Mighty Joe Young remake?
That makes so much sense. I knew I recognized him from somewhere. Monster!
Yeah, I haven't watched this movie, rewatched this movie rather, since before the last time I rewatched the Mighty Joe Young remake. And every time I watched it, I was always like, that guy looks kind of familiar. And now I was able to put two and two together and be like, holy shit! It's can he only play bad Russian people?
What did you think about Beast joining that military organization and them not knowing he's a mutant?
I thought it made perfect sense. I mean, why would he tell them? He has a genius-level intellect, so the CIA would definitely be interested in him regardless. And he's not going to tell them, hey, I'm a mutant. And then they'd be like, what the fuck?
But then they're just like, it's just like, it's such a typical scene of somebody revealing their powers, though. That was one bit where it felt very like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man to me. And I wasn't cool with it. I was like, this doesn't feel like a thing that would be okay in this time period.
I did like the sort of young, brash Charles Xavier who just sort of saunters around.
Yeah, again, that's all great.
With his working legs. I like that he accidentally outs Beast as a mutant.
Yeah, that's a great bit. Well, again, he's cocky, and then that's something that's very endearing, but also makes it clear that he's got a lot of growing to do, and that's what makes him so interesting in this time period.
What's great is that right after he does it too, he's like so apologetic. Like he's like, "Oh shit, decided this guy's a mutant. They had no idea.
Well, you know what's good? He's cocky, but he's not an asshole. You know, like you can be both. You can be a good person and still kind of cocky. You know, like a lot of people use that as a way to cover up their insecurities about doing good things. But he strikes me as more of a conflicted character who's struggling between trying to do what's right for a lot of people and finding out what's best for himself, you know? And if he can even find a middle ground. And he finds out probably not. Realistically, no. So one other thing though about
there's some really good creative use of superpowers in this movie too. You mentioned how
this is a better example of that even than probably the first two.
The most creative they ever got with superpowers in the first two, I think, is in X2. The way they like back and forth between the illusions, and you're not always sure if you're watching a real scene or an illusion. That was always really cool and trippy. But in this movie,
the White House scene in that.
Yeah, the White House scene also. But in this movie, you've got what you were talking about with Emma Frost, how she tricks people into thinking she's having sex with them when really she's just sort of sitting there on the sidelines, which was awesome. You have
Magneto using barbed wire as like whips, like that was insanity, and I loved it.
You had Azazel in that one scene proving why teleportation may be the most useful superpower for killing people. Holy shit. That blew my fucking mind.
Oh my god, that bit was amazing.
I saw this movie.
That struck me as like something that that Matthew Vaughn had wanted to put in a movie for a long time. Like it's so genius. Somebody's sitting in a room going, "What's that?" And they're like, "I don't know, is the pipes what's going on?" And then you just like you realize something's going on. You start dealing with it. You find a guy. You start fighting him, and then you look outside, and there's just all these people just dead on the ground, having been dropped from this great height. Oh my god, definitely, it's chilling.
There's another great one that I was trying to think of. Oh, when those Russian dudes at that checkpoint open the truck to see what's in there, and Professor X uses his telepathy to make it look like it's empty.
Which shouldn't work, because the dog should know that they're there.
Well, he can use his telepathy on the dog as well.
I suppose. I wish somebody would have made a reference to it, though. Like, because somebody should have been like, how did the dogs not know we were here? He should be like, you think I can't control the dog's mind, but I can control humans? Like, that would have been a great moment, but I was waiting for that. Because otherwise, I was sitting there going, the dogs should know they're there. Like, it would have been funny had he been arrogant about that, and they would have been outed there. Maybe that would have been a better reason for Eric to run off and start murdering people. Because then there was that really awesome bit where Charles is like running around to the different people that Eric is like brutally injured with the barbed wire. And he's like, I'm so sorry, but you need to forget my face. Like, he's a very conflicted character, and that's what makes him so endearing.
Yeah. And we get to see our first instance, and this is something that is peppered all throughout the comics, of Xavier doing something that's maybe a little morally questionable at the end when he erases Moira's memories. Also, we finally got Moira.
It's very Superman 2. That's a very Superman 2 thing. I think that was a direct reference, in fact, to Superman 2.
It very well could have been. I was so happy that we finally got Moira McTaggart in one of these X-Men movies, because she's a big deal in the comics. She's one of Professor X's oldest friends, and she helps out the X-Men on several occasions. I don't remember if she was a CIA agent or not, but that was really cool that we got her in this movie, and I thought the actress portraying her did a good job.
I did think that I'm glad the kiss was there for what it was for, because like when it happened I was like, what the fuck? When were they ever a thing? And then I was like, oh okay, so they weren't. He just did that to say goodbye, but also to wipe her memory. So okay. And
to be fair, I think they are a thing in the comics, if I'm remembering correctly.
But in the movie, that came out of nowhere. Like, there's no indication of that whatsoever, and then all of a sudden he just fucking kisses her.
I know for sure that Professor X was romantically connected to Lilandra, the queen of the Shi'ar Empire, but I don't remember...
These fucking bird people, that's right.
But I think he was also romantically connected to Moira. Don't quote me on that.
I'd rather fuck a bird than a member of the CIA. That's my
Bring
Professor. That's more of like my Logan Professor X impression, where he's like sitting on his like deathbed, like rambling on about like fucking bird women. Logan, do you remember when I fucked that bird? It wasn't like that, Charles, and you know it wasn't. Yes, but I like to describe it that way.
It was a bird person.
Half bird, half person. All woman though. My God, Logan. You should have seen the size of her cloaca.
And I don't mean the Rick and Morty character, bird person, although it was very similar to that.
With a bigger cloaca, though. Logan, did I show you pictures of the cloaca? I have pics, as they say. As the kids say. So what I was going to say before, though, was that all the X-Men that nobody gives a fuck about from the comics that they use to fill out the roster in this, I thought they mostly did a good job of making their powers seem cool. The only issue is the CGI in this is all over the place. That's another really big problem, is that the effects on the superpowers are all over the place. Like, Banshee's effect looks like sometimes good, sometimes bad. When Darwin sticks his head in the water, that looks really good. But then when he gets blown up, like the different textures that he goes through, like that kind of looks like a PS2 game.
I loved that moment though when Kevin Bacon just like
it is a great like that's another good use of superpowers, like putting a bomb inside of yourself so it kills you but nobody else. Like, wow, that's good superheroing. Emma Frost's powers never have looked good to me on screen. It always looks like super cheap. It always looks like a Smallville effect.
That's like, I've never been crazy about the effect they use for Mystique changing forms.
Yeah, it also doesn't look very good.
Oh, like the scales flipping over or whatever. I get the idea, but I would have...
It looks like Doctor Who, yeah.
But I've always felt ever since the first X-Men movie that I would prefer if they just did like a T-1000 effect. Sure, it would have been generic, but it would have looked better, I think.
Yeah, definitely. There's something else that doesn't look like that, because it's that quick CGI effect that they have to do on like Doctor Who because that's the budget they have. This is a big budget Hollywood movie. It should not look like an episode of Smallville or Doctor Who. But the reason why is because they've got 18 different fucking characters with superpowers and they have to do them all.
There are a few other characters that I would have rather they used, though. Like I said, I never thought we would get Banshee in a movie. That's great. The only redheaded...
I forgot that Cyclops had a brother with exactly the same power set, but in a different orifice.
Oh, you forgot about Havoc?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, although in the comics, he's Scott's younger brother, not older brother. They
older brother by like 30 years.
Yeah. It's, again, timeline's fucked. But they flipped it because I guess they were like, yeah, we've already done Cyclops. So, and it's kind of a reference to the fact that Cyclops was actually in the actual first class. So it's I like to at least one character in this movie was actually from the first class. You know, you had Beast, who was actually a first class member, and the rest of them were not. But like instead of Darwin, I would have liked to see, you know, that Indian guy.
I liked him though. I liked Darwin. I wish he hadn't died.
I liked him too, and he was a really obscure comic character that I was really
that they made cool. Yeah.
I was really surprised at this to see that they'd thrown him in there. But if they had done instead of him, if they had done that Indian guy with the super strength that got killed off very early on into his run, and instead of the chick with the dragonfly wings, they could have put in Sunfire, and then it basically would have been the second team from the comics, and it would have been funny because the movie would have been called First Class, but it would have featured the characters from Second Class.
What about Firestorm? Oh, not Firestorm. Firestar. She's a mutant.
Didn't I say Firestar?
You said Sun something. If you said Firestar, I apologize. Firestar would have been cool.
No, not Firestar. Firestar is the one from Spider-Man and His Amazing
Why
Friends.
not her? She's a mutant.
She's not a part of that team I was just talking about. They had Banshee, and if they had put in Sunfire and... if they had done Sunfire and that Native American guy that I can never think the name of, it basically would have been the second team from the comics, except without Storm and Wolverine.
Right. Okay. I'm cool with this now. A Storm got a cameo, even though it doesn't make any sense. She wouldn't be born yet.
It also makes no sense. Well, I can buy that because she's a young woman in Apocalypse, so I can buy her being a very young girl.
Well, by the time you get to Apocalypse, it's fine.
But they also fucked it up because in Apocalypse, she didn't have white hair yet. She actually, in that movie, she got her white hair when Apocalypse boosted her powers.
Why do they always do that in these movies? Why does hair always have to be affected by these fucking powers? It's so stupid.
Yeah, I don't know why the movies feel the need to give me origin stories for hair. I mean, Apocalypse did the same thing with Professor X. There's an explanation in that movie for why his hair fell out. I was like, I just figured it was age.
Yeah, like literally there's a line in this where they kind of throw it away as like, oh, you'll go bald. They're like, oh, so he will go bald because he's going to get older. But no, it's this weird emotional thing. It's so stupid.
I don't understand why that needs to be done.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It also didn't look good either. I saw pictures of James McAvoy with the bald cap, and I'm like, oh god. Why didn't they just shave his head?
He might have had some objections to that.
He did it already for this one, and then they found out that he has to wait. He's got extensions in this one because he shaved his head, presuming that he was going to be bald. And then when he got on set, they were like, "Oh no, we were going to have you like wear like a mullet, or no, not a mullet, but like some kind of longer hair." And he was just like, "Well, I'm bald now." So they're like, "Well, you're going to have to grow out as much hair as you can, and we'll give you extensions."
That's hilarious. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's like the one piece of background I can give you.
Well, it looked very natural.
Mm-hmm. Without a doubt.
Also, I'm not sure if that chick with the dragonfly wings is from the comics. If she is, she must be like more recent. And her code name was Angel, and I was like, is Angel a legacy character now?
Yeah,
what happened?
And has exactly the same power set, but with different animals.
She was kind of useless. I could have done without her in the movie. I liked having at least one member of the First Class to join Shaw though in that one scene. So
I like
if it
that
was going to
Darwin
be
faked him out.
So if it was going to be any of them, I'm glad it was her that changed sides because again, she was kind of useless and I didn't care about her. But all of the kids who are on the First Class team when they actually go to stop the Cuban Missile Crisis are all pretty good, I think.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Did you like the recruitment montage, the classic sort of recruitment montage of?
I loved that. Again, that was why I was cool with the whole Cerebro thing.
Yeah,
it was a clever way to do that. It was fun. It was brief, and it gave everybody a nice, pithy little characterization.
Yeah, they didn't have to throw Wolverine in there, but I'm so glad they did.
Yeah, again, it was just funny and a good place to put it. It made sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense later when Professor X is like, "Who's this weird raggedy man in my house?"
Well, he remembers at one point,
Oh, in Days of Future Past, okay.
Yeah, Oh, you're talking about in X1.
I'm talking about both because in both he doesn't recognize Wolverine at first.
Okay, well, in X1, that had been many, many years, and he probably just didn't remember having done that, especially given how brief the encounter was. In Days of Future Past, it doesn't really matter because time travel in the universe was being rebooted, and he eventually does remember that he had met Wolverine before and tells him to go fuck himself, which I always liked. So it works.
I remember that now, yep. Which was like the only reference to First Class that I got when I saw that movie in theaters.
And you just gotta cut Pat Stu and X1 a break. He was a very old man.
He wasn't that old at that point.
He aged a whole lot between the 80s and 2000.
He was still making Star Trek movies at that point.
The character though, he aged a ton in between the 80s and 2000. He pulled a full Obi-Wan Kenobi. He did,
and he didn't have a desert to do the damage either.
No, he didn't even have double suns. I've always imagined that the double suns had something to do with it,
Well, we're going to see it. There's going to be a standalone Obi-Wan movie, so we're going to find out what happened. We're going to find out what aged him so severely.
I'm so excited for that movie.
Yeah, oh my God, that's going to be so good.
I really want it to be like Logan, but with Obi-Wan. And I know that that's kind of a popular thing to say now with any franchise. Make it like Logan. But this is a time when I think it would really work. Because he's out in the desert. He's on his own. There's scum and villainy. We're not supposed to be talking about Star Wars, though. What else? What else can we say about First Class? How did you feel about the whole Cuban Missile Crisis connection?
Brilliant. Gave it such a higher sense of stakes.
Yeah, I liked it a lot too. It's the only time I think that one of these movies, these X-Men movies, have tied themselves to an actual historical event.
Well, because all the other ones are like set in the not too distant future or whatever.
Right. It might even be the only. It's the only time I can really think of that. Can you think of another superhero movie at all that does that? Because usually there's not time travel involved.
Okay, so it depends. Like, I mean, Watchmen, but does that count?
No, because that's an alternate timeline, and it doesn't go down exactly the way that ours did.
The Ultimates?
The Ultimates.
The comic?
What actual historical event is that tied to?
World War II?
Oh. Well, it's like, I meant like a specific event, not like a whole war. But I guess, yeah, anything with Captain America is sort of... I guess Wonder Woman, technically.
Yeah, Wonder Woman.
Although that's another one where... But this was like very specifically, we're taking a historical event. And
I mean, in that, Wonder Woman murders the leader of the German army. Like the real-life leader of the German army, so... Yeah,
you're right. So I guess Wonder Woman is probably the closest.
It's a better example than Captain America, because at least in First Avenger, he's kind of strictly fighting Hydra. So...
Yeah, Captain America, although set in World War II, is not really all... It's not very connected to what World War II was actually about, you know.
There was this whole other sect of it that he got involved in.
The closest he gets to actual World War II in that is punching an actor who is pretending to be Adolf Hitler.
No, he does actually. I mean, they show you in Winter Soldier, he does go off and fight actual Nazis too, but it's not a whole lot. Because he was also not Captain America for all that long as well. He was Captain America for like 8 months.
Right. So Wonder Woman is definitely a closer example to this, just because there is an actual historical figure involved. But I can't think of another superhero story that actually takes an actual historical event, at least not on screen. I'm sure it's been done in the comics tons of times, but takes an actual historical event and dramatizes it in this way and has it go in a sharply different direction than it actually did.
Yeah, and I think it's fine in here because of the X-Men context. I feel like if you did this in any other Marvel movie, it would feel really bizarre. Like, imagine if you did this in a Spider-Man movie. I'm
pretty sure in the actual Cuban Missile Crisis, that boat just turned around when Russia told it to, and then everything was cool.
Well, yeah, so it was exactly the same thing happened. There just wasn't a bunch of mutants on the boat to cut the communications.
Yeah, basically, when it starts to diverge from actual reality is when Azazel goes on that boat and kills everybody and just ignores the orders to turn around.
Right.
And then you have Xavier using his powers to get one of the Russians to blow up the boat, which I thought was a genius way for him to get out of that situation.
It's
another great creative use of powers in that, using Banshee's supersonic waves as sonar to figure out where Shaw's submarine was.
That was cool. If only it looked better.
Yeah, well, yeah.
If only it didn't look like a PS2 game. But then it's followed up by an incredible special effect. Magneto lifting it out of the water. It's so cool. I have one problem with that whole Cuban Missile Crisis bit. I'm sorry, they totally would have fired on the Blackbird. They fly into this fucking hot, tense fucking war zone. They totally would have been fired on.
Probably, yeah. I was just interpreted it as, I don't know what the fuck's going on with that, and I guess they're just trying to focus on what's going on with the Russians, and then they'll figure out what's going on with the weird jet later, you know? Right.
It just doesn't make it only because they start fucking around with shit. You think that both groups would fire upon them as a sign that shit's gotten real.
It may be that the Americans and the Russians aren't sure, because none of them obviously know who this Blackbird, this weird jet that they've never seen before. Nobody knows who it belongs to.
That's true. That's a good point.
So the Americans could be thinking, that's some sort of weird Russian jet, and if we shoot it now, we'll start this whole World War III thing.
Right, so everybody's too scared to fire.
Yeah, on like anything.
Right.
At that. So I guess
there's also that, in terms of creative uses of powers, is that great bit where Charles forces that guy to fire the torpedoes at the ship.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
awesome. And because it has to be a Russian, so that way they think that they're, you know, everybody knows that everybody's on the same page. Yeah, that was all really good. I mean, in terms of stuff after that, the really big, which we talked about the coin scene between Magneto and Professor X, but just to kind of finish up on that, the fact that Professor X was inside of Shaw's head when that happened, my God, so that made it so much better. There's that really awesome shot. Do you remember where Magneto sends the coin through Shaw's head, and there's this like pan across Professor X's head, and he's the one screaming in pain and agony, not Shaw, because Shaw is frozen in time. And I thought that was really interesting and very creative.
What I love about it is Magneto knows that there's no way Xavier is going to release Shaw. Because realistically, if Xavier wants to stop Magneto from killing Shaw, all he has to do is release his telepathic hold on Shaw, and then Shaw would take care of things himself. But he knows he won't do that for obvious reasons, and so he's got Professor X by the balls. Professor X has no choice but to just sort of let him kill him, and I mean he protests very strongly, but there's nothing he can actually do.
Right.
And
he feels guilty about that. Again, he's a very conflicted character about what he can and can't do, and that's what makes him so interesting and so endearing. Magneto, on the other hand, gets his sweet, sweet just desserts and revenge, and then sets himself on a very firm path. Because there's that great bit where he's just like, I hope there's some of you still in there because I agreed with what you said, but you killed my mother. And that's the moment you're like, oh shit, this is a man who has decided his path in life.
What I love about it is immediately after he does that, like immediately after he kills Kevin Bacon, he just sort of becomes Ian McKellen. Like he just comes, and there's that scene where he floats down out of the submarine, and we've never seen him fly at all in this movie. And when he does that, you're just instantly like, oh shit, now he's Magneto. Now he's got like the control over his powers, and now that he's killed Kevin Bacon and he's gotten the revenge out of the way, he's able to focus and he's able to use his powers perfectly. And this whole thing that he's
closure in his emotional distress, and he's found that point between serenity and rage that Charles told him to found, and now he's found his path in life, which is to fucking take over the world.
Exactly. It's just a wonderful moment.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, what do you think about how they cripple Charles and all that, and how they handle their falling out? Do you think it's a little?
That was done really beautifully.
Yeah, it's pretty spot on.
I think it's the best way to cripple Charles in this continuity, because obviously they're not going to do the whole Lucifer thing from the comics where there was an alien agent who Charles was fighting and he crippled him. It's a whole thing. There was no way.
Yeah, there was a wall that fell on him or something. Yeah, this is awesome. Certainly by comparison, but even just in context, it makes a lot of sense and is good. Although, if anything, if you can criticize anything, it's like, oh, a bunch of stuff that sets up X-Men is happening in 2 seconds. That's like the one thing you can criticize, but it's a very dramatic moment, and it all leaves a lot of impact.
What I like about it is that it's his two closest friends, basically. Moira and Eric have been his two, sort of biggest comrades throughout this entire movie, because him and Mystique are kind of, fighting through a lot of it. And so those three are really the team that's been pushing things forward throughout the movie. It's Moira, Magneto, and Xavier. And when the three of them fall out, it's the combined, mistake of her and Magneto that winds up crippling him.
Because they also represent the three different sides: mutants, mutant-human cohabitation, and then humans. So that moment where she tries to stop him from killing all the people on the ships, and he retaliates, and then, Professor X gets shot. And there's just that really powerful moment where because Magneto feels really bad about it, which is great, and then he's just like, because in any other like poorly written movie where you have a good guy turning bad and turning against his friend, he would have been like, blah, ha, 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 that's what you get for not standing with me, blah, ha, ha, ha. And he kind of says that, but it's all in this like super apologetic tone, and he feels very mournful about it.
Yeah.
And that's what's great about it, and makes it feel a lot more realistic. But
the thing that all three of these movies has done very well, even at their lowest point, which is Apocalypse, is that they really sell that whole frenemy thing between Charles and Magneto, and that is so essential, especially with the younger versions of them, because by the time you get to Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen, they still have that, but it's they're older, it all feels like it's in the past. You really have to sell that when you're actually showing them, being young and doing all of these things. And I think that Fassbender and McAvoy deserve a lot of credit for really pulling that off.
Absolutely. That moment where McAvoy just goes, or again, he goes, "We want the same thing." "No, my friend, we do not." Like, that's such a powerful moment, Like, just to put things so blatantly on Front Street. But that climax is insane, and just this, and a testament to how well paced this movie is. There is not one weak stretch in this movie. Everything has good stuff in it. And I think that's because in the other X-Men movies, there's always a part that loses me. In X2, it's the second act, and a little bit of the third act, and then in X3, it's the second half. The first movie is a little slow at the beginning. X-Men Origins Wolverine is bad after the opening credits. They all have their problematic stretches. This one has none. It's all good. I think that's partially because of the different director. He had a better discipline to put things where they needed to be, as opposed to just Bryan Singer doing things the way he thinks they ought to be done, even though it leads to a movie that may not be very watchable. Superman Returns, cough cough. So yeah, no, I just think this movie is the best example of all that. But Dylan, I think we're at the closing up portion of this review. So what else do you want to say?
Okay, so question.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that this is your favorite X-Men movie, having now seen it?
I think it's the best one at being an X-Men movie, and I think it evokes the ideas of X-Men the best. Is it the best movie in this franchise? No, that's Logan, again, if we're counting that. And then Deadpool I also prefer. But straight up X-Men movie about the themes of this superhero team that deals with the relationship between these different elements of human existence? Yeah, definitely. This is the best. The most fun. It's potentially the most thoughtful. I think it and X2 are probably neck and neck in that regard, but it's more fun than X2. And I think the characters are probably more interesting, but I think they're more, the villains in X2 are more developed. That's what helps that out a little bit. Shaw in this is a little evil for the sake of being evil, but Kevin Bacon plays that very well. And again, he's kind of a Bond villain, so that's sort of what they're all about.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I would have to say so. Yeah.
This is definitely a lot more fun than X2. It might be the most fun, again, not counting like Deadpool, that like any of these movies is. Like, it's a really fun movie, and it's,
you know what?
It's
better. It's better than Deadpool.
It's very modern in its sensibilities. Like, you could almost imagine, if they had the rights, you can almost imagine that the MCU would make, if not this exact movie, something kind of similar to it.
It feels like a fresh kick in the ass to the franchise, which is what Marvel would have done with it had they gotten the rights back. Yeah. So I do think that it has that feel, but I also think
I think we have this movie to thank for Marvel still not having the rights to the X-Men. I have a very unpopular opinion in that I would like the X-Men to remain separated from.
They've always made more sense as their own thing.
I think so, definitely.
No, I was gonna say something else. What was it? I forgot. Fuck. I don't know. Oh, Deadpool may be funnier than this movie, but it also has a stretch of being a little boring, which this movie does not. So,
where's that?
We spend a little too much time with his origin in that, when he's sitting around in hospitals learning about his cancer.
Yeah, okay.
It stretches out that highway bit to an extent where it feels problematic. We're going to review that, though, at some point, sooner rather than later. So we'll get there.
Yeah. I think it's really frustrating because every time we review a movie on this podcast, I always think, I think we've covered everything, and then we'll leave, and I'll be like, oh, shit, we forgot to cover all of these things. But as far as I can tell, I think we've about said it. So, yeah, X-Men First Class, it's really good. It's one of the best movies in this franchise. If you like the X-Men franchise, if you're getting into the X-Men franchise, if maybe you gave up after X-Men Origins Wolverine, give it a watch. And if you've seen it before, give it a rewatch. It holds up really well. I caught a few references and things this time around that I hadn't noticed before, or at the very least had forgotten about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's if you haven't seen it, watch it. And just if you're a superhero, if you like superhero movies, this is one of the better ones. It's a really fun, really thoughtful one, and it just does a really good job of taking these characters and doing valuable stuff with them. So give it a watch.
Next time, and by next time I don't mean next week, I mean whenever the next time is that we review an X-Men movie on this podcast, we'll be on to the Wolverine, and we'll get to see James Mangold's first attempt at a solo Wolverine movie. I think it's pretty good. Not as good as this, obviously. But
everything I saw from it made it look thoroughly fine.
It is definitely thoroughly fine.
I see.
It's definitely a better attempt than Origins Wolverine.
That's
the solo Wolverine movies have.
Well, that fills me with confidence.
Yeah, it's certainly better than that, and it's
great.
I'd say it's better than Last Stand too. I mean, it's right in the middle.
Also
of the pack.
Great. Well, good.
Right
I'm excited.
And then after that, we'll get into Days of Future Past and Deadpool and etc.
Well, great. But all that will be in the future. As for next week, we don't have a set thing down. I think we were talking about doing a science week. We're not ready yet. We need another week or two to build some stuff up. So we will review something or do some other discussion next week. Do you have any ideas for that? Or should we discuss that after we get off the call and make it a surprise for next week?
Well, the two other sort of ongoing things that we have going on here on the Demons from Outer Space are, the Daimajin reviews. We've got one more of those to do, and also the commentaries that we were doing on your old Godzilla Gang videos. So those are the only other things that we have already started. I don't have any new ideas though.
Well, I mean, we could finish off Daimajin. It's been a while since we did the second one, and summer's wrapping up. We started. I got that Blu-ray last summer, so be fitting to finish it off now. So sure, why don't we do the Wrath of Daimajin next time?
All right.
So that'll be next week. We're gonna get back into some feudal Japan era kaiju shenanigans. It'll be lots of fun. This one will have kids in it, and shockingly, they don't fucking ruin it.
No. Next week on the Demons from Outer Space, Daiei kills a kid. Tune in for that.
It's going to be so good. And you won't be able to see it because it's a podcast, Colonel Hogan. I'm Bill Worcester, a.k.a. Zazubaar.
And I'm Super DM64, reminding you all that we are all children of the atom.
I did the outro in the wrong order. Oh my god, I'm going to go to hell. The Hellfire Club.